Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Infrastructors, the premier podcast for engaging conversation with influential thought leaders in AI, tech, government policy, and smart city innovation. Today's guest is the former Baltimore Mayoral Candidate and Arundel County Police Commander, TJ Smith. So, TJ, thanks for hanging out, man. Listen, first of all, before we get into the crux of our conversation, what got you interested in law enforcement? Was it something you wanted to do since an early age?
You know, that's a question I get often. And no, it wasn't a lifelong dream. It wasn't playing cops and robbers, and I can't wait to be a cop. I just happened to do it. Ironically enough, I worked at a department store doing security, and ultimately I put in an application to be a police officer, but it was more of a thing of service. My mom is a retired Baltimore City school teacher. My grandparents both worked at the main post office in Baltimore City. Again, it was always service-oriented, so it was opportunity really for service.
And also, former mayoral candidate, city of Baltimore. Yeah. What made you want to run for office there?
I think I lost my mind. I think I lost my mind for a period of time. No, once again, an opportunity for service. I looked at the city at that point in time. We had gone through corruption again with a mayor who had been removed because of what had gone on with her at that time. Just the violence was out of control. I lost my brother to the violence on the streets during my tenure as a spokesperson with the Baltimore Police Department. But I felt like it was a need for some outside thinking. And I had a collection of experiences from being a blue-collar worker to being in the white-collar world of an executive and command in the police department, an executive in government as well. So I thought that I could offer something different from a different perspective, having worked in 3 large jurisdictions at that point.
Well, the reason we're here today is really to talk about technology, traffic stops, police interactions with people where they don't necessarily have to be. Recent officer-involved shootings following those traffic stops that have resurfaced, right? Discussions on whether contactless and restricted policing for those minor motor vehicle violations could provide more alternatives for law enforcement. What's your take on this? To me, it seems like if we can get this thing in order like they have in Philadelphia, it almost seems like the technology adds to the police force, right? You have a bigger police force with less manpower, but more of a force with the technology.
Well, I'll say it's music to my ears, because when I saw what happened in Philadelphia when they essentially, I don't want to use the word decriminalized, but kind of banned stops for small violations.
Driver equality law.
Yes, the driver equality law. But then when I saw that they were going to use technology still to hold people accountable, I said, well, that makes nothing but sense. Because I've long said, why are police used as arms of the insurance companies, arms of the motor vehicle administrations, et cetera? Why can't we create a law where the meter maids, for instance, are able to write that ticket for the bad tags on the parked vehicle? Right. So when I saw that there's technology that could be used to not even have contact, and even give people a little bit more warning, because it could be a paperwork error, to make sure, hey, we're going to get this letter to you to let you know that your car was moving and you don't have insurance according to our records. Right. Now you come and prove it before you get arrested. In the state of Maryland, that's a must-appear violation where an officer can arrest you and take you to jail for driving a car without insurance. Right. Is that really necessary, especially with human error, in mind?
And I was reading about the driver equality law, that again, Philadelphia was the first city to enact this law, and to me it seems like a no-brainer. Right. And I also read where it was like it would cut down around 300,000 police incidents with, for these vehicle stops, which of course, percentage-wise, cuts down, the opportunity for things to escalate further, just as they happen, right? It's human error. How long before we see cities like New York, LA, Chicago, you feel like everybody's going to follow suit with this driver equality law?
I think eventually, and I think what some of the cities have to do is not wait until a tragedy occurs. Don't react to something.
Right.
And I know that there are going to be opponents of it saying, well, we use that as investigative tools to stop people, to probe people because a crime just occurred. I mean, you look at something like Timothy McVeigh and some other serial killers, for instance, that were stopped on a traffic violation. Well, there are other ways that those people will get caught, right? And we have to get back to some basic police detective work. So hopefully cities don't allow some of those narratives to take hold and be the decision maker for them. And don't wait until a tragedy happens and now you're reacting and trying to do something different. I think what Philly's doing is, when you first hear about it, if you're similar to me, you're like, oh my gosh, really? But then when you see they actually did something that still holds the people accountable, we can still hold the people accountable,
right,
but we're just doing it a different way. It makes nothing but sense.
Yeah, and as a guy who lives and drives through New York a lot, they have not something similar to that, but at least if you go through the red light, they've got the cameras, and a month later you get that picture of you and your car going through it, and you're like, okay, you got me.
Right.
And you either pay your fine or you plead not guilty. It just seems like just such a practical way for a police force, and I think for the police officers,
right,
would take a lot of pressure off of those guys. A lot of times, listen, if you're a police officer and you're walking up to that car, right, because you pulled off for a tail light broken.
Right.
I've never been in that position, but I assume in their mind, with all the things that happened today, there's got to be in the back of a police officer, no matter what kind of car it is, a minivan, whatever it is. There's got to be that thought in the back of your mind, man, oh man, I hope this person isn't.
You have no idea who
right,
you're encountering. One of my field training officers said, what's the most dangerous call you can go on? And when I ask people that question, they'll go down the list. They'll say domestic, they'll say a traffic stop or whatever. And his answer was always the next one. You never know. You really never know, because could that person have just done something that everyone is unaware of and they think So you again, when you cut down on these moments, it doesn't mean you're not going to be able to go out there and investigate a crime and use other things. You'll still be able to do it. But the profession isn't going to grow. The applications aren't billowing over to be police officers in America. So what way can we still keep the community safe, hold people accountable, because there are things you have to do, like have insurance, make sure your tent's not too dark, make sure your registration's up to date, without having as much face-to-face interaction that could result in a language barrier that turns into a wrestling match and turns into a shooting for no reason.
What I love is, and again, this also seems like a no-brainer, like the folks at Rekor have a deal with the public safety in Oklahoma, where you have the cameras all over the place and it reads the license plates, right? And if your insurance isn't up to date, your registration, it doesn't know if the driver is black, white, Latino, whatever it is. And it just seems like, again, and you being a guy who knows Baltimore better than anyone else, and just the understaffed of police in big cities, I would just think that this technology gives, again, the police officers an opportunity to focus on bigger problems.
And I would think from the political spectrum that no matter where you're aligned politically, whether it's on the conservative side or the progressive side or somewhere in between, you're touching a lot of pieces there where we're holding people accountable for their actions. We are limiting the interactions, and it's not discriminating. It's not this thing that's seeing if this person looks a certain way before we levy a ticket or what have you, similar to a red light camera or a speed camera. So the more you use technology, and I think one of the bigger things for a lot of people is, as long as there's some oversight, proper oversight to ensure information is not being misused.
Back to the Philadelphia driver equality again for a second. I know, like in New York, issues with different mayors that have been in office. It's always, do we bring back random traffic stops, right? And this basically is wiping that all out. Again, as a guy who was on the forefront of all this stuff, is it something that when you were chasing down bad guys, is it something that you would have liked to have seen back when you were on the force?
Well, I was able to watch as computers came in. Then as a supervisor, I never got the luxury of having an e-tics machine where you just scan the driver's license and it spits out the warning or the
Those
tickets.
are in the cars, right?
They're in the cars. So as technology improved, it made the job much more simplistic. It freed up your time. It gave you more discretion, actually, and it gave you more tools to actually confirm if somebody was telling you the truth or not.
Right.
Where you could do a bit more research in a quicker amount of time. So again, anything that is going to, one, keep me safer, first of all, and two, allow us to still hold people accountable and maybe do it in a quicker way. And from the government hat, my government side, we could do it in a quicker, safer way, hold people accountable at a cost-effective way. Sign me up,
Right.
So as we have these conversations, we just have to make sure that we're reminding people of all the boxes that are checked. Because I just want to be honest, the Philadelphia situation, when I first heard about it, I thought it was a little ridiculous. But my thing has always been no different than here in Baltimore when we talk about certain crimes,
Sure.
certain low-level crimes, is the infrastructure there to divert people to something else. If you're not going to prosecute low-level thefts, is the infrastructure there to get them help, get them treatment, whatever it is. If it's not, then they're going to do the same thing again. But if the infrastructure's there for those people who are driving without insurance, and now we can do something about it, then that makes sense.
Right. On the opposite side of that technology spectrum, and I hate to date myself, but what was it, 1979, David Berkowitz, the son of Sam killer in New York, he got caught because of a parking ticket.
Yeah.
Right? So I guess if you had that technology back then, that parking ticket may not have led to his arrest. Right? So
and that goes back to what I was saying about the Timothy McVeigh and that's who I was thinking of, the son of Sam situation. Again, these are great big stories with this one thing that you look at and say, it was the parking ticket. If it wasn't the parking ticket, it would have been something else.
Right.
And we have to get it out of our mind that for every one of those situations, how many bad ones occur. And I mean, how often are we talking about a son of Sam or Timothy McVeigh being caught on a traffic stop?
Right.
Wayne Bundy. How often are we having those conversations versus how often are we talking about, and we don't even have to go as far as an officer killing somebody, an officer getting in a fight with somebody and injuring themselves and out on disability for X amount of time. As a result, you injure your gun hand, you're done for a while until you're back together. So,
like I said before, back to the Oklahoma and Rekor situation there, how much of racial divide and racial disparities could we get rid of, maybe and rebuild communities a little bit where you don't have, because it seems like the divide between police officers and residents of a community often just come from these regular traffic stops, right? If somebody thinks they're getting pulled over, even if it's someone who has done something and they get pulled over for a taillight, they think it's for something else, they're already, maybe they're reaching for a gun in the glove compartment, right? So to me, it just seems like a no-brainer moving forward to bring communities back together. That divide right now that we have, especially over the last 2-3 years, between police and police trust in the communities.
Yeah, I think again, there are a myriad of opportunities here, and from that government side, if you have an unbiased piece of equipment that's feeding you data, now can you package that into some sort of education initiative? If the stats are staying similar as to when the human element was involved, so now we know we need to inform this particular community that there's a higher rate of driving without insurance, driving on unexpired expired tags, et cetera, to educate the community. Or is it a transportation gap? I mean, again, you go down a list of things. Is MVA too far from the communities that are having the biggest problems? And is it a cost thing? I know a lot of this might sound like excuses, but they could be real things. They could be real problems. So I think you could glean information beyond what your first thought is, which is simply we can have a contactless stop. And look, this is not about taking people out of jobs, but look at the efficiency that you've seen in some retailers now, where you're having contactless payment, where you're not even having to slide your credit card anymore. You just tap the thing or use your phone.
I
so
love
you don't
the
have
tapping,
to have a
by the
bigger.
way.
Yeah, exactly. So we should be progressing in the world of law enforcement, no different than the world is progressing around us in different ways.
In your experience in law enforcement, do the people on the other side appreciate the transparency from law enforcement, during these stops?
Anytime you're introducing new technology, especially, transparency is paramount. I unfortunately was with the Baltimore Police Department when a piece of technology was unveiled as a surprise to me and surprise to the community.
Right.
The problem became not the technology and how great it works, it became the lack of transparency. So people feel better when they understand what they're getting into on the front end. And some things aren't meant to be covert, right? We want people to know we have some of the best technology out there. Some of our casinos in the state of Maryland, for instance, years ago when they first opened, the technology was so great. And I remember some robbery suspects would come in and test them early and often. And we were catching every single one of them. Everyone was getting caught. And I told the casino, I know y'all don't like talking about this because you don't want people to think they're going to get robbed. However, it's a great deterrent to tell people, look at the technology we have. You come here to do this, you're going to get caught, and here's our success rate. So I think as long as you're upfront and walking people through it, getting community buy-in, it becomes a no-brainer. That's just where we're going.
As a former police commander, a former Baltimore PD spokesperson, and also a lifelong resident of Baltimore, as I said before, do you feel that there are any out-of-the-box ideas that you've come up with that you'd love to propose, just to increase public safety in general?
You don't have enough time for that. That's why I ran for mayor. I'm all about being outside the box. I'm about trying things as well. Look, the fact that we can collect data and do it in a way that there's oversight and do it in a way that people's personal information is safe, but to hold people accountable and potentially have a major impact on public safety, again, I'm all for that. And people, when they're victims of crime, want to know where the cameras are.
Right.
They want to know why.
Sure.
But I look at this high definition. Again, I did some security work back in the 90s, and I remember having like the little 8x8 square television that was in black and white. And now we have basically 4K, 8K digital cameras that are recording so much. And even as a spokesperson, and in my role as a sworn police officer as well, I would tell people when I communicated, concentrate on the way this person walked, because they can't change that. That's their mannerisms.
Right.
So we have so much more technology to show us these things, for instance. Just that as an example. But again, to be able to maybe zero in on certain areas with an unbiased piece of equipment as well is the way that we get better. And, I talk about communities at large, and every urban center really has these problems. The focus, I think sometimes we're biting off a lot more than we can chew, and we focus on the macro, and maybe we need to just close our eyes and think about the micro. What can we have an impact on? What is the most violent area? What is the most troubled area, whatever, troubled community? What can our plan be there in order to make an impact? And how can we use technology to help make this community safer? Look at the doorbells. We're doing it with doorbells now. We can talk through the doorbell when we're not at home.
The guy who invented the Ring, by the way, is very rich right now.
And he should be, because it makes a lot of sense.
It's such a simple concept, right?
Very.
It really is
From
phenomenal.
the peephole to that.
Yes.
It's unbelievable.
Look at all the people who are, if they come and take packages off you, everybody gets caught by the Ring bell.
And again, as a spokesperson, I've talked about the Grinches who've stolen Christmas, and we've caught them on Ring doorbells, and a Nest or what have you. Again, this technology exists, and people have this this fear when you talk about it. And they think it's this magic when you log into Facebook. And it's like, I was just looking at that. Yes, because you just clicked all permissions. And everything's communicating with one another. It's not magic. It's what you allowed. And it's all about making your life easier. So as we make our life easier, Alexa, order me this.
Sure.
How about we make our life safer as well by use of technology?
Absolutely. And a guy who knows where we'll be another 3 years from now. It's going so fast, right? We used to say, in 10 years we're going to, now it's by next week we're going to do this. And TJ, as a guy who, just a driver who has gotten those tickets in the mail, hey, you were going 45 and a 35. When you get pulled over for traffic, that's a half hour. Right? By the time the officer talks to you, goes back to the car, writes up the ticket. I mean, I'd rather, if I'm trying to beat that red light and I get caught and get a ticket, it's also saving me time, not necessarily the money, but it's and you got me on the camera. So to me, it's like if you're a law-abiding citizen, you base all right, boom, you got me.
It's no arguments. I've had so many arguments on the side of the road with people who wanted to deny it. And this is back when we went from radar to using laser, which was even better, where you're pinpointing a specific vehicle, and people still argued with you. But like you said, now it's you got me. I did it, basically. But I also say when we talk about camera technology, for instance, as a person who trains people in media stuff, the camera changes your behavior, whether it's for the better or not. It changes your behavior. And one of the hardest things when teaching people media stuff is you're sitting there having a casual conversation, and then you push play on the camera, and so no, go back to the person I was talking to. And when you're dealing with people who with police with the body-worn cameras, that person who's a complete jerk, mayhem, or whatever, when they know that they're on camera, they might have a different attitude. And then even on the other side of that, and we saw it here in Baltimore with this gun trace task force, they're such criminals, and it's such muscle memory, even with their cameras on, they're committing the crimes. So you get so much more as we do embrace technology. You can correct behavior, you can capture behavior, and we should be embracing it because we're already using most of this in our house, and we're trying to find the next best thing. It's refrigerators who can order your food after your milk's out. I mean, come on.
It's the Jetsons. Man. We're living in the Jetsons.
Finally. I mean, I just can't get to rush hour traffic yet. But.
Before we go, and I want to hear about your podcast real quick, but on just the last point I'll make here is how many times are you on a major highway and you see a police officer have somebody pulled over and they're standing outside the car where the cars are zipping by at 70, and just for the police officer's safety. At that point, I remember my dad always used to tell me, he'd say, son, you see why that officer has his wheels turned this way? Because if somebody smacks into that officer, it's going to send his car a different direction than the person who he pulled over. So you just, it just seems safer and just so much, it's such a better situation. Listen, to me, I love this Philadelphia equal driver.
Safety first.
Safety first.
For the community, safety for the officers. And that's less liability, less money for everyone.
Hey, man, we checked your registration. You're out. You got 2 weeks to pet. Blah blah. I just think it's a no-brainer, and I hope, and I don't see why it won't, but I hope to see other major cities follow suit on the Philadelphia on that new law, the equal driver law.
And moreover, they can actually package it. Here's my comms hat coming on. They can actually package it probably a lot better because Philly kind of piecemealed it. They did this first and then went to the technology, and you didn't hear as much about the technology on the front end. Other cities can have the conversation at the same time. We're going away from it, and we're introducing. And again, I don't know how many different political spectrums can be totally opposed to it. You're going to have naysayers because that's what people do. They just look for comments to troll on. But, the majority of people, I think, are going to be like, sign me up. That makes nothing but sense. But the safety of the officers and the people, that's the most dangerous thing.
Absolutely. Logical, just a logical way to go. Before we go, you have a very popular podcast, WMAR in Baltimore. Tell me about that. Where can people, how often can they get it? What do you guys usually talk about on the podcast?
So WMAR2news.com is where to go to get the podcast. But everything. I call it the good, the bad, the ugly. I like to call balls and strikes in Baltimore. We have our problems, but we have our beauty. So talked about the crime, of course, but also talked about fishing around the Baltimore in the harbor, talked about food around the Baltimore in the harbor, and more recently with the election this summer, talked about the election with some of the candidates, and also WMAR 2 News under podcasts. And, we try to just talk about local issues and more than just complain. We want to have ideas of how to solve some of the problems like this.
And I've seen videos of you fishing, by the way.
You
love it.
Yeah, I can't wait. I was at one of my fishing holes recently, and I didn't take my fishing rods. I just went to hang out and just get some vitamin D.
Yeah.
And so many people were fishing, and I'm sitting there looking like I have to always keep my rods in my car.
Got to get in there.
So I got to bring them back. I can't wait.
I love it. TJ Smith, thank you, my friend.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Appreciate the conversation.
That's all the time we have today, my friends, on the Infrastructors. Join us next time for our conversation with the president of the Howard Hughes Corporation, Greg Fitchin.